Welcome, everyone. What we're going to be talking about this evening is how to look at the body differently. As the title would suggest, we're going to start to talk about seeing the body differently, how to use the principles of acupressure, acupuncture, TCM in general to change the way that you work and maybe even change the way that you think. We're going to be spending the next, say, 40-ish minutes or so going through how to implement the principles of TCM into your everyday practice. We got Core Therapy. Good evening. Colleague of mine, Troy. Troy. Troy is lovely. Troy, so he just got a comment from Core Therapy. Colleague in common. Troy is wonderful, wonderful. Well, it's lovely to meet you. Okay. So we're going to begin with the usual, little bit of housekeeping, nothing too serious. We'll talk about, first off, rethinking our approach. I want to tell you what this isn't, what I'm not going to do. The first is, I'm not here to try and convince you of anything. I've been to my fair share of workshops in the past, webinars in particular, and I know that by and large, a lot of webinars, unless they're with an association, there's some sort of shtick, there's some sort of sales pitch, there's some sort of I'm trying to convince you of one thing or another, and that is not at all my goal. I will tell you that at the end, you'll have a coupon code if you choose to apply that, because my acupressure course is going on sale next week. But that is not at all the point of this. Really what the point is we're going to be talking how to think. We're not going to be going into any new techniques. We're not going to talk about new ways to press on the tissues. We're going to be working through a different way to think like a TCM practitioner, because if you've been to any of my workshops, particularly in the world of acupressure, you know that's really where the magic lies. So what we're going to explore together, we will begin by talking about the traditional foundations. We'll go through a little bit of history as far as how this whole system came to be. But we're going to spend a lot more time talking about this second point, which is scientific explanations versus TCM energy principles. Now this is a very important topic to go through, because what ends up happening is there's kind of two different groups of people in the world of manual medicine. And of course, there's certainly overlap. I don't want to dichotomize too terribly much. But we've got our hardcore therapy, like body mechanics on one hand. And then on the other hand, we've got our more energetic people who are much more interested in things like maybe they're Reiki practitioners, so they want to get into acupressure because they know it has something to do with chi. So we've got these two sides of the spectrum here, right? But what's really important to understand about the way that we think in the world of TCM is our job, and one of the things we do in year one of our education, is we learn that a paradox is an essential thing in how we think. Yin and yang, they are paradoxical. They are literally exact opposites, but they exist simultaneously. Day and night, same thing, literally opposites, but they exist, and they must exist for the other to exist. So when we talk about science versus TCM philosophy, that's just a way to describe it, but more realistically, we're going to be talking about how do we balance these two seemingly paradoxical ideas in our minds simultaneously. All right. After that, we're going to talk about acupoints, meridians, a little bit about energy circulation. We'll talk about Eastern wisdom. We're going to spend, we got these slides on here. We'll talk a lot about the mind-body-soul connection in Taoism, and that's going to be really helpful for those of you who are interested in learning how to work more with, say, people's emotions without crossing any professional boundaries and staying well within scope of practice. Because I'm sure most of us, in fact, I'm pretty confident that every single person who's in the workshop today have had those clients who just dump on us. And maybe you want to say something, or maybe you've got a tool in your back pocket that you think you'd be helpful. But of course, you are, after all, just a massage therapist with the biggest air quotes I could possibly muster. Meaning your scope of practice is to work on the connective tissues and soft tissues of the body. And yet, we are still presented with psycho-emotional stuff almost every day. So we're going to go through how we look at this from the TCM lens and what we can actually do about it. And then we'll finish off with some practical applications, thinking like a TCM practitioner. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about the moment that shifted everything for me, the moment that really changed my mind in this whole world of traditional Chinese medicine. So I'll tell you a little story. Now, I will keep the story relatively brief, but I'm going to tell you the story about how I got into this whole world of TCM. Because you see, I grew up in a fairly poor, middle-class-ish family in far northern Alberta, and our world was trades. That's what I knew. Where I grew up, which the nearest town, I kid you not, had a population of 32. You could hardly call it a town. In fact, it's technically considered to be a hamlet. Nevertheless, that's where I grew up. My graduating class was 14 people, and it was a K to 12 school. All of this is to say, I grew up in a place where we had two paths. That's it. You could either go into the oil field or you could go into the trades. That's all there was. But maybe it was divine luck. Who knows what it was? I ended up having some really amazing opportunities in my early teenage years to actually leave town, which was shockingly strange where I grew up. Now, as I left town, I ended up moving to Calgary when I graduated high school, and I got into the trades. And I was a tradesman up until about 23 years old. And then I decided to go on a walkabout. Christine says, which town in Northern Alberta? You're from Peace River? Ah, okay, I know Peace River very well. You drive right through. I'm from Little Smoky, right in between two places called Fox Creek and Valley View. A tiny place. Grew up on a farm. So these are two paths. I move into Calgary and I still go down one path. I become a tradesman, but then at 23 I decide I'm going to go on a walkabout. I need to find myself. Started reading Jack Kerouac, you know the drill, right? I'm sure a lot of us have been there in our early 20s. So what I do is I hitchhike for about a year. I hitchhiked from Calgary all the way down to Mexico and back up, and it took almost a year. Now, at one point in time, right around the 7-month period, between 7 and 8 months into the trip, I was pooped, I was exhausted, I was tired to the absolute bottom of my soul. So I decided I needed to just go into the mountains, just hang out, because I'd spent a lot of time actually doing the hitchhiking and in cities, and it was scary as hell, a lot of experiences. So I figured I'm going to just go way up into the mountains. So I make my way up, way into the high Sierra Mountains, and I decide before I go fully off the map, and this is, cell phones were a thing, but like the most advanced cell phone was the Motorola Razr, right? You remember those days, right? And I didn't have one. So the only way I could keep in touch with my family was via email. So I go into this little tiny library in this little tiny town, and I start typing this email to my mom, just letting her know, like, hey, I'm going off grid for who knows how long. My poor mom, though. My poor mom. Anyways, get about halfway through this email and I hear this deep, booming, resonant voice. And I turn around, and standing there at the desk, there's a full-on legit Buddhist monk. Robes and everything, shaved head, the whole nine. Now, I'm super curious at this point, like, what on earth is this Buddhist monk doing in the middle of nowhere? So I go up to this guy and I say, excuse me, can you tell me, what are you doing here? And he looks at me and he says, that's a good question, but I think the more important one is, what are you doing here? Now, he might have not said it exactly like that because, memory has a way of doing things to the story. But I do remember my reaction and my response to that. Oh, I started crying and I'm like, I don't know. Because I went on this walkabout to find myself. Meanwhile, the only thing I'd focused on for nearly a half a year was survival. So I'm a wreck. He sees it and he says, why don't you come and stay with me for a little while? So I go and I stay with him. And I was planning on spending about a week there, but what ended up happening, and to get to his place, was it was about 2 hours down a gravel road, and then a smaller gravel road, and then a dirt road, and then a dirt path. And by the time we get there, I'm like, this is in the middle of nowhere. And it was this big, beautiful monastery. Crazy how I ended up building it. It's another story, though. Well, near the end of the week, this huge rainstorm came, and it wiped out the road, so we couldn't go anywhere. So I ended up spending about a month with this guy. And the only other people there were these 2 other Buddhist monks. So I spent a lot of time with these monks, and 2 of them, the other 2 that weren't the guy who picked me up and brought me there, they were acupuncturists. Now, this is fascinating, you see, because a couple of years prior, I was talking with my best friend, and we decided we needed out of the trades. And we wanted nothing more than to work in some form of business or industry where it was just chill. There was nobody shouting. It was calm. It was quiet. There were lovely cups of tea here and there. We wanted a much more calm environment. Now, we wanted to go into massage therapy, you see, but at that point in time, being deeply in the trades families, our parents were like, are you sure about that? And we're like, yeah, no, that's probably a bad idea because, of course, guys don't massage. Absolute nonsense. Nevertheless, decided that acupuncture was the thing to do. So once I got back from a hitchhiking trip, enrolled in acupuncture school, and I started, and the first year was absolute hell. I oftentimes describe year 1 of TCM school like putting your brain through a pan-galactic gargle blaster. If there's any Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fans here, you know what I'm talking about, right? Like your brain literally gets juiced. It's really difficult. So I'm learning about like qi and yin and yang, and like I don't know anything about medicine. I was a tradesman before this, right? So this is my first exposure. Come year 2, I'm ready to tap out. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. One, I just didn't understand it, and two, it seemed like too much. But nevertheless, I had this one client who came in, and she was classic primary frozen shoulder, classic. And primary frozen shoulder, just as a reminder, is idiopathic. We don't really know what causes it, but it follows the exact same signs and symptoms. Usually, well, we go through the freezing and then the frozen and the thawing phase. Usually lasts between 1.5 to 2 years. Again, idiopathic, not much to be done about it. And it happens to a very specific demographic, and that's postmenopausal women. So we had a primary frozen shoulder come in, and I knew, like according to all the books, there's nothing we can do. So I go to my supervising practitioner. I say, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And he says, oh, well, needle stomach 38. Now, stomach 38 is an acupoint on the leg, pretty much right in the belly of tibialis anterior. And I say, you want me to needle? Okay, I'll needle the leg. And he says, you know what, I'll come in with you. So he comes in, and this woman is lying on the table, and we get her to do a bit of medial and lateral rotation, right? And she has, oh gosh, maybe 10% range of motion, almost nothing, and it's relatively painful. So the doctor puts a needle in stomach 38, and he starts to play with it, manipulate the needle little by little, and we're getting her to keep moving the arm. And honestly, like second by second, her range of motion gets better and better and better. Her eyes are going wider, and she's like, what's happening? After about 4 sessions, maybe it was 5 sessions, she had regained almost 80% range of motion with primary frozen shoulder. Mind blowing. And that was the moment when I realized, okay, there's really something to this. It took that long of studying TCM before I was sold. I was fully in it. So I tell you that story because when we talk about what brings you into this whole world of medicine, everybody's got different reasons. But fundamentally, the thing I want to get across to you is that TCM teaches us how to look at the body totally different. It gives us a different way of thinking about everything from frozen shoulder to anxiety. And that's what I really hope to impart upon you, is what these differences really are. Sorry about that. All right. So then let's talk about the problem. The problem with massage therapy training today. Well, there's a few problems. One of which is most massage therapy training focuses on treating the body as a part. Now, after I graduated from TCM school, I had a mountain of student loans and I needed to make money. And I don't know about you, but when I first graduated, I sure did not have a full client load. So I got a job tutoring anatomy and physiology at a college where I met many of the people who are in the webinar today. And I started tutoring anatomy and physiology, but very quickly I moved from tutoring to teaching, and I was teaching first year and second year practical massage, which again is kind of strange because I'm not a massage therapist, I was a TCMD, but we learned massage as part of our program. So I eventually make my way into teaching second year therapeutic techniques. And when I first started teaching it, I didn't understand. Once again, I found myself sitting there going, I don't get it. I don't get it. Why are we learning how to treat a very specific muscle? Like, why are treatments based on only working on the shoulder if there's shoulder pain? Why aren't we working on the rest of the body? It just didn't make sense to me. Because remember, at this point in time, I'd spent 4 years, 10-month school years, plus doing an exam, learning to think like a TCM practitioner. So it boggled my mind, once again, that in traditional massage training in the West, that's not at all how it's taught. It's taught specific part, specific dysfunction. So that's one of the big problems, is they're taught, we teach typically, and this is coming from a guy who taught in colleges for almost 10 years, is we tend to teach kind of what I call half-ass physiotherapy, which is to say, like, you learn assessment, you learn treatments, but it's not the same as doing a physiotherapy degree. So you get like a small handful of tools, and then you get continuing education workshops, which might teach you a little bit more, but it leaves us with just enough knowledge and information to know that we know what we're doing, but not have a full picture of the body as a whole. And this, in my opinion, is a serious problem. So let's jump into acupressure here. Let's take a look at it traditionally. And remember, if anybody has questions at any point in time, just fire it into the chat. I've got it right here and I can see it to my side. TCM is old. It's a really old system of medicine. In fact, when we look through the history of it, TCM has the earliest documentation comes from about 3000 BCE. This is about 5,000 years ago. Now, what's interesting about this is the documentation that we have, coming in ancient scrolls and stone tablets, well, stone tablets almost exclusively, indicates a fully formed medical system. That's 5,000 years ago. So although that's the earliest texts we have, we can be guaranteed that this medicine is way, way, way older than that. So it's been around a long time, let's say conservatively 10,000 years, which is super fascinating because one system of medicine, in fact, the only system of medicine that's been around for that long, is traditional Chinese medicine. You might be thinking, well, what about Ayurvedic medicine? I wish that Ayurvedic medicine took that first place, but it doesn't. Ayurvedic medicine, interestingly enough, is a derivative of traditional Chinese medicine. Came from China, moved into India, became Ayurvedic medicine. So it's a really old system. Now, just because it's old, does that mean it's good? No, it doesn't, right? But the things that have been kept around and have continued to be taught and practiced, they're the gold. They're highly refined techniques. So we got a long history. Now, how did this all come to be? Well, say 10,000 years ago, there were no doctors, there were shamans. And what these early doctors, shamans, discovered was that if somebody was bleeding and you press on it, what happens? Bleeding stops. Or if somebody hurts himself and you rub it, what happens? It feels better. So this is important because traditionally speaking, acupressure, massage, was the original and the very first form of traditional Chinese medicine. Before herbs, way before acupuncture, and even before any other type of internal medicine. So massage therapy is considered to be the oldest form of formalized medical practice, which is fascinating. Now within TCM, we have massage therapy, but we also have two other branches. We often say that traditional Chinese medicine is a three-legged stool, and you need all three legs in order to be stable. One leg is going to be our energetic medicine, and that's our acupuncture, to a lesser extent, acupressure. This is moving qi and energies through the body. And trust me, we are going to talk about what qi is shortly. We also have internal medicine. This is dietary therapy and herbs. And then lastly, we've got our physical medicine, and that's acupressure. But traditionally speaking, that also included bone setting and what we'd now call chiropractics. So a fairly large scope of practice, you see. So the question is, how does it work? Like, what's actually happening? Let's talk about qi now. Qi. I was obsessed with qi when I was going through school. I asked literally every single one of my instructors, hey, can you please tell me what's qi? And every single one of them invariably said the exact same thing. They all said, qi is energy. That's it. Qi is energy. And that didn't really sit well with me. It was way too vague. I don't like vague answers. So I started to dig into it and look at different research and read different books that were written by different authors coming from all different parts of the world. And the answer seemed to be pretty much the same, no matter which way I looked at it, as people would always say, qi is energy. But if we look traditionally, like, why is qi considered energy? Well, when you look at all of the descriptions of what qi is traditionally, is essentially it was a word used to describe everything that they didn't understand. So it's used to explain the unanswerable questions, right? Things like, how does the wind blow? How do flowers grow? How does the wind blow? Well, that's wind qi, of course. How does the heart beat? Oh, well, that's heart qi, of course. Now we know the wind blows through a very complex geological process of temperatures going up and down and lunar cycles, and I don't know, it happens. But I want to be clear, I don't understand how wind works, but science as a whole has a pretty good explanation. In fact, science as a whole has a really good explanation for most things that historically we would simply say qi. So this is a cool thing about Chinese medicine, is we insist upon updating. Traditional Chinese medicine, it's called traditional Chinese medicine, but what's really fascinating about this is the traditional Chinese medicine that's taught in schools was a system of medicine that was developed in the 1960s. Say it again, the 1960s is where traditional Chinese medicine was born. Which is why there's so much dogma behind it about this is the way it is. But if we go pre-1960s, what we actually find is a system, or a group of people, being the doctors, who were so fascinated by understanding how the human body worked, they were regularly updating their explanations and their systems of understanding. So that's actually the real traditional Chinese medicine, is a group of highly curious people who are doing everything they can to understand how the human works. So now we have very modern interpretations. We've got different ways of looking at qi, right? And what's fascinating is the word saying that qi is energy, it still kind of works. Because qi can be described as chemical energy. This is our cardiovascular system moving chemicals around our body, hormones. It can be described as electric energy, our nervous system, of mechanical energy, which is going to be in our fascial system, of mechanical energy. Or sorry, there's elastic and then mechanical. So we can still use energy to describe qi because it is very much energy moving through the body. What makes us move forward? Well, we could say that that's just qi, but we could also say that it's a combination of chemical, electric, and kinetic energies moving through our body. What makes our heart beat? We could say heart qi, but we can also say that it's a combination of chemical and electric energies. And yes, chemical energies are an energy. So you see, we do have ways we can interpret this much different nowadays. I'm going to take a little sip of water here. So then continuing on, our explanation of how it works is by applying acupressure on very specific points, very precise points throughout the body, we restore proper energy function. We remove obstructions, we stimulate the nervous system. Ancient map of points, we'll get into that, but more importantly is we can view this as a city map. So this is how I describe how it works. So if you live in a city for a while, you get to know where the most common traffic accidents are or where rush hour is going to have the highest amount of congestion, right? No matter how great the city planner was, there's always areas which have higher degrees of congestion and areas that have a higher probability of accidents. So we can actually kind of view the body the same way. I like to use the city map analogy. Now, historically speaking, the analogy that they used were irrigation channels, which is also translated as irrigation meridians. So the word meridian literally means channel of which water flows through. So in ancient China, they used the analogy of irrigation. In modern times, we can use the analogy of traffic in a city. So we can view the vehicles as energy, all different types, mechanical energy, chemical, electric, so on and so forth. And we can view the common locations of congestion as acupoints. These are areas in which, for one reason or another, we get buildup of energy or we get a stagnation of energy. Now, you've all felt them. Whether or not you've practiced acupressure for a moment in your life or not, you felt these stagnations. You felt acupoints because it turns out there's around an 85% overlap between trigger points and acupoints. So if you have ever felt a trigger point, you felt an acupoint. These are areas that have a higher probability of stagnating. And if you think about a trigger point, it kind of makes sense because mechanical energy simply can't flow through a trigger point. Same thing with chemical energy. Blood doesn't, well, it does, but to a very small degree, flow in and out of a trigger point. Energies don't flow in and out. So this is really how we view it within Chinese medicine, right? Is we view the body like a map. And we have spent, call it 5,000 years, call it 3, doesn't matter, but thousands of years mapping the body with a high degree of precision, an incredibly high degree of precision. So let's now talk about the yang aspect. How does TCM work according to science? Well, as I said, there's neurochemical changes, endorphin releases produced by endorphin releases and reduction of cortisol. Now, what's very important about this is, again, there's been a lot of research done on this, is it has something to do with where you press. Locating an acupoint is important. But what's actually more important than locating an acupoint is how you stimulate that acupoint. The intensity of pressure matters a ton. In Chinese medicine, we call it de qi. That's D-E-Q-I, de qi, which literally means qi sensation. Now, qi sensation, we usually say, is uncomfortable but not painful. So we push on a point until the client feels like, oh yeah, no, there, you found the spot, which is the same as trigger points, right? We know the drill. With a trigger point, you find it and you apply pressure until you're in that 7 to 8 zone. Not painful, but clearly noticeable and definitely uncomfortable. Now, it's super cool because de qi is literally described in the most ancient texts we have. Finding that qi sensation, finding that ache, that good pain, as some clients call it. And that turns out to be absolutely essential when it comes to these effects. When you do press on an acupoint, and when you do get de qi, that qi sensation, that good ache, that's when the body releases endorphins. That's when the body goes into a state of regulation, when it reduces cortisol. Say regulation, we also talk about nervous system regulation, improved heart rate variability. Heart rate variability and nervous system regulation are essentially saying we take the entire system into a parasympathetic mode. Genuinely, this is what we've seen with brain scans. When you properly stimulate an acupoint, whether you use a needle or you use your fingers, we bring a person into a sympathetic zone. And we know that through heart rate variability studies, and there's been a ton of research on sleep as well. So we know that it is profoundly effective on sleep, largely through its neuroregulatory functions. Now, what's really interesting about Chinese medicine and the world of TCM is there's more and more research being done all the time, like an endless amount of research. And that research is proving to be highly conclusive that it has an effect. What's fascinating, though, is what causes the effect is still a little bit of an unknown. Yes, we know that there are neuroendocrine things about it, right? Yes, we know that there are regions of the brain that activate and deactivate, but there's still a lot of unknowns. And this is where a lot of contestation comes from, why people say that acupuncture is a hoax and acupressure is not real, because there's so much we don't know. We know it works, but it's a bit of a black box. There's a lot of we don't know within science, which us in the TCM realm, we're totally okay with that. Not that we're like, oh, who knows, it doesn't matter. But we've got the mentality that goes like, we don't know yet how science is going to explain it, but we've got a pretty damn good explanation in the world of TCM, and that works well enough for us right now. So let's talk about the overlap. This was an interesting realization for me. The myofascial lines compared to the traditional meridians. I remember at one point in time when I hadn't started teaching second year massage yet, but I was auditing the class, and I saw this map, these myofascial meridians, which you can see here on the left side. These are Tom Myers myofascial meridians. And I remember talking to one of my colleagues saying, why do you have the cutaneous sinew regions? Like, why do you have the sinew channels? And he's looking at me like, what are you talking about, sinew channels? And I look at this picture, and I say, well, this is the sinew channels, the one you see on the left here. That's the sinew channels. And he says, what are you talking about? So the next day I bring in my TCM textbook. In my TCM textbook, I open it up to the sinew channels, which is a description of channels, meridians, that dates back about 1,500 years or so. And he goes, no way. I go, yeah, that's what I mean. He says, no, these are Tom Myers anatomy trains, and he mapped this off of the myofascial system, the fascia within the body. They just so happen to overlap the traditional Chinese meridians with almost exact precision. It is mind-boggling how much overlap there is between the myofascial meridians and the traditional Chinese medicine sinew channels. So all of this is to say that there is a lot of overlap between how we explain what the body works or how the body works in the West and the East. We just use a slightly different language, and by and large, when we adopt the TCM perspective, we're much more open to the I don't really know how it works, but if it does work and my clients are actually getting better, that's the most important thing. All right, how we doing? Everybody doing okay? Any questions? Being mindful of time, I don't want to talk for all night, so. Okay. Well then, what exactly are these things called acupoints? Good, I'm glad everybody's enjoying it. What are acupoints? Well, I've developed a very specific definition. Now, this is my own definition of acupoints. They are a specific point found along a meridian that have local effects and effects on distal parts of the body. So let's pause there, and we'll do it again. A specific point found along a meridian that have local effects and effects on distal parts of the body. Now, the reason I phrased it like this is I want this definition to be acceptable to everybody. No matter if you are the most hardcore scientific-minded person or the most esoteric, spiritual, woo-woo-minded person, I wanted a definition that works across the board. I think this works. When we press on it, it has local effects, like a trigger point, for example. We know there are local effects. We can see the local twitch response. We've got a local aching sensation. We know that muscle locally is going to relax. But we also know when we work on a trigger point properly, we do release endorphins and we do decrease cortisol and we do have an effect on the nervous system. So that's the distal parts of the body, which, when stimulated with precision, leads to pain relief and systemic changes in a healthy direction. That's my definition of an acupoint. And I want to be clear, I value that definition because that definition means you don't need to know exact locations. One of the things that we do when we go through school is we learn precise locations of like almost 400 points. We have to be precise within about half a centimeter, or give or take like 3/16 of an inch if you do inches versus a centimeter. So we have to be very precise when we're doing our point location exam. But my experience now, being well over a decade into this, having taught this countless times and had really good success clinically, is it doesn't matter that much. What we need to know is these points exist on a pathway, a meridian. My opinion is the meridians matter way more than precise acupoint locations, particularly in the beginning. Once, if you choose to go into the level 2 and level 3, because right now we've got level 1 with acupressure, that's acupressure and meridian massage, but I'm working with some colleagues on level 2 and level 3. We'll talk a lot more about acupoints and their internal medicine effects, but when we're talking about the effect on the body, the musculoskeletal system, precise points doesn't matter too terribly much. So back to it. Very precise points, when stimulated, when stimulated with precision, that's the important part, lead to healthy changes systemically. All right, so that's my definition. What exactly then is a meridian? So a meridian, once again, my definition, is a pathway through the body that are consistent and predictable from one person to another that transmit force and energy. Once again, I believe this definition works across the board. Doesn't matter if you're hardcore science or the exact opposite, this definition works. They're predictable pathways through the body. Traditional Chinese medicine, these pathways, they're not only predictable, but they are precise. Tom Meyer's myofascial lines, once again, they're predictable and they're relatively precise. They follow very regular pathways. These are meridians. And what's interesting about meridians is they're not that hard to learn. Yes, if you decide to dive deep into TCM, you will learn, well, the lung meridian starts here and it actually makes an internal branch here and comes out here and goes. Good, helpful. Much more helpful when you really dive deep into the internal medicine stuff. But for the majority of us manual practitioners, we don't need that much precision. We need to know the general trajectory of these meridians through the body. And so if you're curious, I go through all of that, not a sales pitch, but I do go through all of that in the most simplified terms in my textbook. So let's talk about this next part, the mind-body-soul connection. This is one of my favorite parts to discuss when we talk about TCM, the mind-body-soul connection. All right. So in the West, some interesting thing happens. We got this guy named René Descartes. Very important scientific thing. You know the Cartesian grid? We all know the Cartesian grid. It's that XY axis. We've all taken math in elementary school or junior high or whatever, right? X, Y, that's called the Cartesian grid. That was René Descartes. The saying, I think, therefore I am. Once again, René Descartes. Or how about this? The scientific method. You know the one, where you come up with a question, develop a hypothesis, come up with a method in order to test that hypothesis, record your observation. The scientific method, literally invented by René Descartes. He wrote the book called The Method. So this is an amazing historical figure. Very awesome. Did a ton of good things, and I would never dream of saying that René Descartes was nothing but terrible. But he did do one thing. The scientific method changed our world forever in a genuinely positive way. But in doing so, he also created something else that I believe changed our world forever, maybe not forever, in a quite negative way. Because here's what happened. In the process of developing the scientific method, because he was also an anatomist who desperately wanted to study the human body, he made a deal with the church. The deal was mind and matter was definite, and there was this body-mind split. So he literally made a deal with the church saying, all right, church, you take the mind and the soul. We in science, we've got the body. I mean, I can't guarantee like you went to the Vatican and had a handshake with the Pope or anything like that, but it was during René Descartes' time, and René Descartes in particular, who came up with dualism. He said that these are separate things. They are not related, and he was very much a strict Catholic. They're totally separate things. So it's so fascinating because this mentality of mind-body dualism is so ingrained in Western culture, we don't even think about it. But let's take, for example, the word mind-body connection. How does that sound? Mind-body? Of course, it sounds great. Do you believe in the mind-body connection? Probably. Now here's the funny thing, dualism is so ingrained that mind-body connection literally means there are two things that are connected. It doesn't mean there's the same thing. It means there are two separate things, but there's a connection. That's just how ingrained mind-body dualism is in our world. It's so deep. And the problem with that is, when we separate them, we create this weird distinction that what happens to the body doesn't affect the mind. Total nonsense. You ever stub your toe? Yeah, try and think about anything when you stub your toe, right? Of course there's a connection between the mind and the body. And then there's this pesky little thing called the soul, which so many people choose to not even talk about because it's religious. But yeah, I mean, religious uses the word soul a lot, but we can, I suppose, contextualize the word soul outside of the spiritual context or religious context to say that there are parts of you that make you, you, right? So this is what happened in the West. Good stuff, scientific method. Bad stuff, dualism. Now, what's important to understand is this dualistic split never happened in the East. It didn't happen. There was no point in time in its entire history, I shouldn't say entire history, up until, again, the 1960s, when dualism really started to take a strong foothold in China. But up until then, no, it was mind, body, soul, same thing. It's like separating you got this what's the difference between hand and arm? Like, yeah, there's a wrist. That's a man-made delineation. It's all part of the body, right? So we could separate these things, and it's helpful for conversation, but the reality is there's no separation. It's like trying to separate the skin from an apple. You can do it, but it's an apple. These are different parts, so they're all parts of an apple. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well. But what I really want to get across is in the East, there's never been a separation. When you work on the body, of course, you work on the mind and the soul. When you work on the mind, absolutely you work on this body and the soul. In the West, we have a term, it's called psychosomatic, right? You've probably heard of it. Psychosomatic means that you create an illness in your body via what's happening in your mind. The easiest way to view this is when you're dealing with grief or depression. You'll feel it in your whole body. So we understand that there are psychosomatic illnesses. That's well established. What's super fascinating is in TCM, we actually say somato-psychic. What that means is if you're having psychological issues like anxiety or depression, it's actually a body thing. There's something out of whack in the body. Chi isn't moving properly in the body. So how do we fix psychological conditions in TCM? We don't talk about it, with one exception, is we want to understand what the emotion feels like. So you see the second point. The words used to talk about the mind are the same words used to describe the body. Emotions are described in physical sensation. So let's take anxiety, for example. I want you to think about this. For those of you who have experienced anxiety, what does it feel like in the body? Like for me, when I think about anxiety, I get a little sensation, my chest is closing. I feel my shoulders kind of go up. I feel my eyes get a little bit wider, right? I can feel all of these things happening in my body. The same thing goes with anger. What's anger like for you? I know for me, when I get angry, I feel my face go red, my ears get hot, I feel my jaw clench, I get this look on my face, like I can feel my face distort, right? So emotions are described in physical sensations. Now that's super duper important, unbelievably important. Because when somebody's coming in with anxiety and they describe what it feels like in the body, we just work on the body. Dealing with neck pain? You got anxiety? And what do you feel? Feel tightness in the neck? Well, we're going to work on the neck a little bit. That's it, right? You're feeling scared? Where do you feel? I kind of feel tension in my low back. Great. We'll work on the low back. I don't need the story. I don't need the life story as far as why you got anxiety. I just need to know what it feels like in your body. Because what's happening in the body is what's creating in the mind and vice versa. So not only are they inseparable, they are literally the same thing. Additionally, in TCM, mental characteristics are determined by the state of the body. We say that memory is related to kidneys, courage is related to gallbladder, right? So I could go on and on and on. But much of our characteristics come from places within the body. When we look into 5-element system, which is such a super cool system, we can look at personality characteristics, right? So, for example, I'm very much a metal person. Things are just so. It's got to be exactly like this, highly systematic, right? So that's a characteristic of metal. And sometimes, for me, if I get borderline obsessive compulsive, that means my metal is out of balance. So it's something to do with what's happening in my body that needs to be balanced. Now, I could go on and on and on with that, but the point I'm really trying to make here is this separation never occurred. The soul was never separated, and it was considered to be an aspect of the body. We work on all of them. So why am I telling you all this? Well, a number of reasons. The most important is because this gives you a lot more freedom. I am not telling you to practice outside the scope of practice. I want to be very clear on that. Stay well within your scope of practice. You are not a counselor. Well, maybe some of you are. But if you're not a counselor, then you really shouldn't be digging into somebody's past and asking them, well, how did that feel? I mean, you could ask, what does your body feel like? But this gives you so much more permission to start asking when somebody does have issues and they're on the table and they are dumping on you this story about stress and work and how much they hate their boss or they want to get a divorce from their significant other and da-da-da-da. You could say, thank you. I appreciate that bit of information, but I'm really curious. Can you tell me, where do you feel that in your body? Now, what happens within TCM when you study acupressure is we get to understand with a higher degree of precision what to do about it. What points actually help release anxiety? What points help release grief? What points help release anger? All of these different emotions that do get stuck within the body. Additionally, if you are interested in the world of trauma, there's this unbelievably good book called The Tao of Trauma, which once again frees us from any need to talk about trauma. We don't need to. All we need to do is talk about the body. What's going in the body? Because, as Buster Van der Kolk says, it does indeed keep the score. TCM gives us the ability to work not just on trauma, but on everyday emotions and ensure that no matter if it is a cognitive problem that's causing a physiological problem, psychosomatic, or the other way around, we've got the tools to deal with it. So far, so good. Thumbs up. Everybody doing all right? Cool. So then, how to think like a TCM practitioner. Finding points, it's easy. It's really easy. In my acupressure and meridian massage course, for those of you who have taken it, you know I'll go through a fair number of points, and I give you a relatively precise location. If ever you go to acupuncture school, which, by the way, if anybody here is considering going to acupuncture school, I would love to have a chat with you. I'm very passionate about that. But if you do go to acupuncture school, you will learn how to find every single point with precision. Turns out they're pretty darn easy. If you've been practicing for any length of time, you've already been working on them. Once you find them, pressing on them, it's even easier. Now, acupressure techniques are more than just pressing on a point. That is certainly the case. In fact, the reason I call my course Acupressure and Meridian Massage is because it's not just acupressure. There's a lot of things we could do to the meridian. But again, the technique is very simple. Techniques tend to be, particularly if you've been practicing for any length of time. So then what's so dang special about this whole system? It's a state of mind. It's how we think. So how do we think like a TCM practitioner? Well, there are a number of different things that we can do. One of the things that we're trained in, and anybody who takes a course from me, particularly level 2 and 3, what we train you in is how to observe life like a work of art. What do I mean by that? Assuming you are not an art critic and you actually like art, whether that's going to a museum or you're going to an art exhibit or you're going to a heavy metal concert, when you go there, you just take it in. You take it in like when you're listening to music, right? Like you're just enjoying it. Looking at a sunset. Imagine you're watching a sunset. When you watch a beautiful sunset, you're just, you take it in. And one of the things we learn to be a to be a skillful practitioner is we learn how to observe everything like this, like a passive observation where a ton of information is coming in. So this is the first point. We observe life like a work of art. Now the second is, and this sounds a little bit woo-woo and hokey, but hear me out. We learn how to be sensitive to how the universe works, and we do our best to live in harmony with it. What do I mean by that? That line, by the way, is taken directly from Huangdi Neijing, which is a traditional Chinese text. When I say that we are sensitive to how the universe works, what I basically mean is we're sensitive to how nature works. Within TCM, a fundamental principle that it is like a core principle is humans are not separate from nature. We like to believe we are because we live in these square boxes and it's really nice and comfortable, and I definitely like my square box. I much prefer it over living out in nature. Like I said at the beginning, I spent almost a year hitchhiking. I spent a lot of time out in nature. So don't get me wrong, like my house. But in TCM, we are inseparable from it. So what that means is there are cycles, day and night and seasons, and they affect us. They deeply affect us. So one of the things that we learn is how to observe all of these cycles, not just day and night, not just the seasons, but microcycles and macrocycles of nature, of the universe. And we do our very best to live in harmony with that. But there's more to it than that because we use this knowledge to help our clients and patients. For example, you have somebody coming in and it's the dead of winter and they've sprained their ACL and you say, why? And they say, well, I was playing soccer. Fine, but if you ask them, you really ask them, do you really want to be playing soccer? I would bet dollars to dimes they would say, at the core of me, no, I want to relax. Imagine if you just talk to yourself. In fact, I want you to do this right now. We're at the end of March, right? It's nice weather where I live in Calgary. It's getting warmer. Pay attention to how you feel compared to a month ago. So a month and a half, mid-February, when the weather was brutally cold. You didn't want to go outside because it was cold, but in winter, if you really pay attention to what's going on in your inner world, winter is a time of stillness, slowness going in. Spring is a time of explosive energy, right? So we pay attention to this in our clients too, and we help harmonize them with the natural world. Harmony is the natural state of all beings. I also really like that because what this means is the natural state is harmony. It's equilibrium. I'm not going to say balance necessarily. Everything in nature, every human, everybody that comes and sees us, their entire being is craving harmony and equilibrium, which is very great because what that means for us is all we need to do is give it a nudge here and there. We don't heal anybody. We don't fix anybody because we know that their body, their mind, their soul, their entire being naturally wants to be there. All we got to do is give it a little nudge here and there. It takes so much pressure off when we understand that's the case. And lastly, one of the things we are taught very early on is to be very mindful of your state before you enter the room. We're taught that you bring in energies with you. So yes, I've been doing my best to balance the East and the West and the science-minded and the more spiritual-minded. So without getting too much into the principles of coherence and having an effect on other people through our energetic fields, which is genuinely true, I'm sure we can all agree that if you walk into a treatment room and you're just in a pissy, angry mood, your client can feel it, right? So we're taught, pay attention to that. Make sure that you walk into the room with as much grace and presence as possible. Which takes us into the last topic that we're going to go through. Characteristics of a sage-like doctor. So when I was oh gracious, this is probably 5 years after I'd graduated. I got very interested because I was reading one of the classic texts because that's the type of guy I am who reads classic texts apparently. And I noticed that the word sage doctors of ancient times kept coming up. Now these classic texts, they're really old books, anywhere from 500 to a couple thousand years old books. And they're talking about sage doctors of ancient times. I'm like, who the heck are they talking about? So what I did is I went through every classic TCM book I could get my hands on, and I found every single place sage or ancient was described. And this is way before ChatGPT, so I couldn't just type in a prompt for, no, I did this old school. I had to go to the library and everything. So I did. I took a list and marked everything down. Every single time a sage doctor was mentioned, I wrote down their characteristics. So what were the characteristics of the sage-like doctor? Oh, I should mention, these are in order of prevalence, how often they showed up. Number 1, the sage doctors of old are genuine. They're genuine. What does genuine mean, right? I'm curious, just type it in the chat. What does genuine mean to you? And I'm going to ask a few of these. We've got a list here of characteristics, and they're a little bit vague, so I'm always curious what these words mean. I'll give you a second as I take a sip of water. Authentic, Danica, thank you. Authentic, honest, love it. Thank you, Jonathan. Beautiful. Real life, honest. Yes, that's it. Isn't this fascinating? And I really want you to just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about a system of medicine that's the oldest documented system, continuous form of medicine in history. Thousands and thousands of years. And in one of the most highly populated places on the planet, meaning there are a lot of doctors. And the single most important thing to be a sage-like master is to be genuine, is to be real, to be true, to be authentic. I want that to sink in. Because for me, seeing that was like, wow, I could have swore the most important thing was having good techniques, was being able to find the points and know exactly which herbal prescription to give and know exactly how to do my assessment. That's what makes a good doctor. No. It turns out what makes a sage-like doctor is being genuine. Next one, balanced, equanimitous. This one, I like the word balanced or equanimity much more than balance. Balance gives this image of like a static teeter-totter, right? Like don't move. Stay perfectly balanced, which isn't at all how reality works. It's much more dynamic, which is why I like equilibrium, allostasis. So they are balanced. They're constantly seeking this balanced state, which I'm sure you've got your own definition of that. But I want to talk about this next one. Subtle. This comes up a lot. The sage-like doctor is subtle. So again, throw it in the chat. What does subtle mean to you in the context of being a very skilled practitioner? Subtle. Not forceful. I like it. Not forceful. I like not forceful for a number of reasons, Jonathan. I think that's a really good one. Tai Chi comes to mind. Yeah, Tai Chi. Directly smooth. I love it. I love it. And this is it. These are the things that come to my mind as well. Is we don't force, right? We don't force anything. We don't force our ideas. We don't force a treatment. We're just subtle in everything we do. We're tuned in. I really like that, Christine. We're tuned in. Yeah, I love it. I love it. When I go into a treatment room, sometimes I think about this. Like before I walk in, I'm like, okay, Jess, listen, be subtle. Like and I just try and embody this idea of subtle, being tuned in, and I like this, attuned. Now, Core Therapy Center, can you tell me your name, just so I don't have to keep thinking Core Therapy Center? But attuned, I really like that. I really like that. David, wonderful, thank you, David. Yeah. So we're genuine, we're balanced, or we're equanimitous, we're subtle, wonderful. What's next? Wu Wei, effortless action. I'm not going to ask you to define this, but this is something that comes up all the time. This is like one of those things in Chinese medicine we learn like day one, Wu Wei, because it takes you 5 years to figure out what it even means. Wu Wei means effortless action, which interestingly enough, Francis, relaxed is a good way of saying Wu Wei. This is going with the flow, kind of, but it's literally translates to doing without doing. So it kind of coincides with the rest of them. It's like we don't force our ideas, and in not forcing and simply being present, things happen. So it's effortless action. Second nature or first nature. What do you mean by that, David? Second nature or first nature? You'll have to expand on that a little bit more for me. Okay, so go Wu Wei. And then lastly, The sage doctors of old are also immortal. They can time travel. They have X-ray vision. They are all-knowing, and they are exempt from atmospheric influences, whatever that means. Maybe they can fly. I don't know. Maybe they're weightless. Maybe gravity doesn't work. Now, I write this to say, take it all with a grain of salt. Like, yes, this is the traditional sage-like doctors, but they're mythical beings. So do your best to do this. And if ever you get to that point of like time traveling, let me know. I'd love to learn how. But the idea behind this is to understand that really, at the most core of traditional Chinese medicine and acupressure, it's not about the points. It's not even about how you press on the points. It's about you. It's about the mentality that you bring with you into every single session. And that's the thing I love most about this medicine. Once again, as a guy who is powerfully scientific minded, I love it because it insists upon me showing up in this balanced, chill state, which is really what I was craving way back when I was 22 years old and I knew I didn't want to be in the trades. What I really wanted was to be able to show up every single day and just be chill, be relaxed, be in a state of absolute presence, be as close to a meditative state as I could possibly muster and still make money while doing it. All right, so with that being said, let's wrap this up. Why learning acupressure isn't about more techniques? Because as a massage therapist, you of course know 90% of the techniques already used. I can certainly teach you how to refine these techniques, definitely. But it's not about new tricks. It's about a new perspective. It's about a systemic approach. It's about using familiar techniques in a more powerful way. And it's about transformative results. And I want to talk about that last point in a second here. I'm going to look here. Doing things with minimal conscious thinking. It's been done so often, things become intuitive. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so this goes into Wu Wei, doing things intuitively. Exactly. The sage-like doctors, they've done it so much. There's this word that it's called a gestalt moment, right? A gestalt moment is when you have a realization, and they happen because you've just done it so much. The knowledge is so deeply ingrained in you. Like you say here, David, that it's minimal consciousness. It's very intuitive. Though some of the most powerful treatments isn't when you do a 20-minute assessment and you figure out the exact issue. It's when you see them and you're like, I don't know what's going on with this person, but I know I can help them. Great, pop on the table. I love it. Love it. Right, transformative results. This will be the last point. I do want to mention that traditional Chinese medicine is classified as a transformative medicine versus a restorative medicine. I'll be clear that you can use TCM. And when I say TCM, I want to be clear, I am not talking about acupuncture. I personally don't really practice acupuncture that often anymore. I prefer my hands. Nevertheless, it's considered a transformative medicine by and large. What that means is if somebody comes in and they've torn their ACL, we do not try and restore them to their pre-torn ACL state. We might get there, but that's not the goal. The goal is to get them to wherever they are on the other side of the healing process, which kind of takes a bit of pressure off, and I don't want to make it seem like, I don't care if your ACL heals. No, we are still very much focused on helping our clients get better. But the goal is the transformative process, which again is an inner alchemy thing. Who are you? Anybody in here who's had a serious injury, you can attest to the fact, the version of you that's on the other side of recovering from a serious injury, you are a different person. You have transformed. And TCM bakes that into the model. So we're not just helping somebody with their ACL, we're helping them through the process of figuring out okay, who am I now? For the next 6 months at the minimum when I can't do the thing that I love doing, like playing soccer or whatever. We help them transform, internally transform. Okay. Oh, there we go. So, with all that being said, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. I hope you learned something. I love talking about this. I figured I should just mention it all. I did say that if you haven't taken it already, Acupressure Marine Massage, again, not trying to make a sales point here, but it is on sale next week, and I figured I'd give you early access plus an additional coupon discount so you can use. See down here, it's called AcuWebinar 2025. Scan that QR code. Use the code AcuWebinar 2025. You'll get an extra discount off of the Acupressure and Marine Massage course, which is pre-approved for continuing education credits pretty much all across Canada and United States. So again, I'm very thankful for your time. If there's any questions, fire them in the chat. If not, feel free to head out. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me this evening. Well, you're welcome. My absolute pleasure. And really, really lovely to see some familiar names and meet some new names. I'm glad it was enjoyable. My pleasure. Good stuff. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Cheryl. That's very kind. Oh, my pleasure. Hadassah. Hey, Hadassah. Very glad you could join us. I'm glad it's been inspiring, Jonathan. That's great. I love hearing that. Thank you. Wonderful. I know, Choga, we got a question coming in from David. We got, I know Troy from being board members. Ah, you were in Colorado with Troy. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Are you out east? Because he's in Quebec, I believe, Montreal now. So are you out there with him as well? Oh, my pleasure, Gladys. You're welcome. Ah, he's still in Colorado. Awesome. Glad you could join us down from the old US of A. Thank you. Well, if then there's no questions, we'll call it a night. Have a lovely rest of your night, everyone. Once again, thank you very much. Don't forget to scan that code, or if you don't scan that code, just check your email the next day or so when I announce the sale. Because you're here, you can use that code AccuWebinar 2025, and I hope to see you with the next webinar. And if this was interesting and you want to see another one, fire me an email, request something, because I enjoy doing it. I just don't really know what everybody wants, so let me know what we could do next. All right. Good night, all.